Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. Jeez, that does sound a little bit weird still, but I think we'll get used to it. Today I've got a bit of a different video today, a bit of a recap and a sort of a timeline of my marathon journey. I got a lot of good feedback from last week from my first video about when I started and where I started, and everyone was like, Amrit, when did you start running? And I thought it'd be a good insight, as the channel is still quite new, for me to sort of take you back to the very start of my marathon journey, which was quite a long time ago. I've been doing this for quite a long time, just over 13 years now. It'd be nice for me to take you on that journey, for you to see sort of how I've changed and mainly evolved over those years, because I know a lot now than when I first started. So it'd be good for me to sort of share that with you, so you can see how I became the runner that I am today from the very first time. So I hope you guys enjoy it. Sit back. I'm going to talk you through a lot of the pictures that I have, because back then I wasn't taking videos of myself. I never had a recollection to sort of share it socially. I was just doing it for the love of running. So I'm going to talk through as much as I can and insert and put pictures and videos where I can, and just talk you through the journey. So I hope you enjoy it. So I started running in 2005. I remember going to the pharmacy, weighing myself in the pharmacy, and looking back at the number thinking, geez, I don't actually like what that number says back to me. And I wasn't very active at the time. I wasn't too sure what to do. So I decided to go running. I was quite inspired from the London Marathon. Paul Radcliffe setting the world record a few years earlier, and also one of my biggest inspirations is Kelly Holmes winning, had 2 Olympic gold medals. So I went to the park during the summer. I decided to do 1 lap of the grass track, and then the next day come back and do 2 laps, and then the third day do 3 laps, fourth day 4 laps, and so on. And that is essentially how I started running. I felt a sense of, you know what, I actually enjoy this. This is actually quite nice. It makes me feel good. It was good for my mental health. Bearing in mind I was around 18 or 19 at the time, so I felt as if I'm doing something physically active for myself, and I also enjoyed it at the same time. Fast forward a few months later, I entered the ballot for the London Marathon. I had no idea the ballot process or what it would entail in terms of people getting rejections, but I have won a ballot spot on my very first attempt, which was just a massive blessing in disguise. So I in 2007 won the ballot spot, so almost like a couch to sort of marathon distance. So then I used a plan that I just found off the internet, just basically following that along. I had no idea on nutrition, what to wear, what shoes to wear, tracking. All I knew was that I've got a basic Casio style watch, and I'm going to go out and run to a time. So I followed that plan as much as I can. Approaching the race, my sole aim was to survive. Like, I had no intention to break any records. I just wanted to get from 0 miles to 26.2 miles, and however I got there, I would have been, and I was happy to do that. The race, if I look back on the race now, I ran an even first and second half. I think I ran a 2 hours 21 for the first half and 2 hours 21 for the second, and my total time was 4 hours 42. So let's fast forward to 2011. So yeah, it's been 3 years since I did my last marathon. I went to university, did a postgraduate as well at the same time, and during that time I just couldn't commit to running another marathon. So happened that it was 3 years since the last one. I managed to get a charity place for the London Marathon. Reasons why, because I just felt as if every marathon that I'd passed since my first one, 2009 to 2010, I just felt incredibly jealous of everyone else doing it. Considering how much pain and suffering that I was going through the first one, I wanted to feel a part of that. I wanted to feel a part of, I want to be there. So I managed to get a charity place with WizKids, and I raised money for WizKids, and they gave me a training plan, a bit more extensive to the first one. I had a few more years of experience. I trained with the guys at Brunel University. Nothing crazy. It was just turning up to a track where the speedy guys were going around the track, and I was basically just going along at my own pace. It was just nice to be aware of other people, see other people run, see how they moved, see how they were covering the ground, and just to share the time with them. So with that race itself, I ran 4:19 that day, so knocked off 23 minutes from the first and second race. So we're moving on to 2012, the Olympic year. I trained a little bit better this time round. Again, I followed the same training plan from WizKids that they gave. It was just a basic Excel sheet with time brackets, and I found the time that sort of suited me and sort of planned and trained towards that. I was running around 3 to 4 times a week, building on that consistency. Now this is the second year that I've been running a marathon back to back, so it was my first attempt of doing one every year, and that was more or less the plan, to do from 2011 onwards, to do at least one every year. And I did set myself a target of running, I think it was 5 or 6 London marathons before I turned 30, which I managed to sort of crush anyway. But the 2012 race was a really good race for me. I came in at 3:53, and I just felt great. I just felt great in the race. I had prepared myself better. I was enjoying running. I loved running. I loved the distance, I loved how it made me feel, and I loved sort of how I could see improvements over my times just from the previous year. I didn't do anything fancy, I didn't do anything differently, I just trained and continued running. So finishing the marathon the previous April, just continued running and keeping that consistency going throughout the summer and then the autumn, and then when it comes to winter time, sort of ramping up and following a training plan. So now we move on to 2013. Again, I ran a charity place, and this was probably one of the worst years, I think. I had a massive issue with my stomach during the race. I don't know what it was, but I'd obviously, looking back on it, I'd eaten the wrong foods for the night before. I hadn't carbo loaded to any extent. And I sort of had a much heavier breakfast, and it just sat really heavy on the stomach. I ran a decent race. I ran the exact same time as the previous year. Everyone who knows the story will know that I went to the Portaloo 3 times, one at 18 miles, felt fine, and then again at 20 miles, just not feeling too great stomach wise, desperate to sort of find the next Portaloo. What was going through my mind was the fact that I maybe need to sort of go on the side of the road. Where can I do it where no one will see me? So it was quite embarrassing, but in the end I found a Portaloo at mile 22, stepped in there to reveal there was no toilet paper, there was nothing, no supplies. All I had on me was a very wet and sweaty sweatband. Let's just say I used all available resources that I could in that Portaloo and left it all in there. And funny enough, that period on from 22 miles to 26.2 was the fastest of my race, obviously because I was carrying less load, to knuckle down on what it was I was eating and what I was drinking prior to the race, just to make that experience a little bit better, because the ones before there I'd have a few issues with my stomach, so something wasn't particularly right. So it was something that I needed to address. So moving to 2014, I never ran the London Marathon in that April. I got married at the end of 2013, so I skipped training over the winter just so I could be home during that period of time. I decided then to do Berlin Marathon. So the interest that I had, there was majors and races outside of the London Marathon. I learned about this Major 6 series, and it was an opportunity for me to sort of get into the race. And I really enjoyed it. Actually, it was a great race for me. It was the first race where I had no stomach problems. So bear in mind, this took me 5 attempts. I know there's some runners out there who can get it from day one. I know some runners who are still searching for that magic sort of routine for themselves. But for me personally, it was my 5th attempt at running the marathon, and it happened to come in Berlin. So the race itself went very smoothly. I enjoyed running abroad. I enjoyed running a different race from London. I think that was the key thing. It was a nice break to have from London, and it was nice to sort of do 2 of the 6 majors. And from there, I started to be a little bit more aware of, there's a race in Boston, there's a race in New York, and at that point in time, obviously I'd run 350 that day. I had no idea, seriously no idea, how I would break 3:05, because that was my time that I needed for Boston qualification. So I sort of put that to the back of my mind. I sort of banked that, be like, I'll tackle that once I get a little bit closer to the race distance. I use that experience to know that I can cover the distance fairly well. I'm enjoying running marathons. I'm comfortably able to do 1 marathon a year and have no problems with it, fitting it around work and life. So I was able to train, and I actually enjoyed training over the summer. It was quite a nice change up for me. Last 3 to 4 years, I was just building mileage after mileage after mileage, incrementally increasing my miles per year, improving my form very slowly. Again, at this point, I still wasn't doing any interval work, any speed work. I didn't even visit a track. I wasn't even going to the gym. So I was very much just running. So we made it to 2015, and again I tackled London again with a charity place. So this race was where I ran with a pacer from the start. I targeted the 3:45 time and absolutely nailed it. Came in at 3:43. I thoroughly enjoyed this race. We ran such a great race as a team. I stayed with the pacers from the start, very start. And another big recommendation of mine is every time you do run a race, if you are going for a specific target time, whether or not you feel comfortable in doing so, I'd highly recommend running with the pacer. These guys are very experienced. Highly recommended. It gives you that sort of space where you can just stop thinking about time. You can just basically put one foot in front of the other and just run to the clock and let them do the work mentally for pacing, what splits. So it's a great way to run a race. Just doing stuff in the gym, nothing crazy, just using the weights machines, doing some core work, just utilizing what was available there at the time. This time training plan wise to the NRC training plan, so on the app, I managed to download one of their training plans, and I actually used that as a sort of guidance to sort of go through the race and that particular training block. So again, I'm just slightly making slight changes now. 2016 was a breakthrough year for me, my running journey. It started off with the Tokyo Marathon, so I got a ballot spot for the Tokyo Marathon. And again, this is building upon me now chasing the majors, so fully fledged in to chasing the majors. This will be my 3rd out of the 6 races, and I trained really well for this race. So I've joined Nike Run Club in Stratford, and first group running in since I started running. So I absolutely loved it. That was the biggest change for my running period. I was running with people who are faster than me. I was training with some world-class coaching from 2 of the coaches there, Rory and Omar, I think, and that was the backbone to my Tokyo Marathon experience. So I'd started interval training, speed training, tempo work, long runs. So the pieces were starting to fall together in terms of trying to make myself a better runner and cover the ground better and improve my form. So the race itself went really well. Flying to Tokyo, we went out on the Wednesday night and before the race, and it was a culture shock to turn up there because it was just so alien to me and so different to anything I'd ever experienced before. The race went out to break 3:30. My goal was to come under 3 hours 30 for the first time, close to a 15 minute personal best from just a year previous. So it's a big jump. I mean, I'm trying to make a big jump, but I felt confident enough that I trained really well. I ran with someone that I bumped into on the race. I happened to bump into a girl who was running. She came up to me and said what was I was looking to do. She was looking to do 3:30, so was I, and we ended up just sticking together for the whole race, and we paced it perfectly. Came in at like 1:44 for the first half, and then again 1:44 for the second half. It was a beautiful sunny day. I wore tights that day, which is probably a little bit of a mistake because it started off really cold, but I went with it, and it sort of got me to a time of 3:28, and I felt really proud to run that race, essentially halfway in my quest for the majors, which was driving me year in year out. The 2016 London Marathon, I had no goals for this race. I went into that race completely pressure free, and my aim was to just sort of cement my sub 3:30 time, which I'd run 8 weeks previously in Tokyo. I had a few niggles coming out of that race. Hip was a little bit out of sync, glutes weren't firing, so as I was starting to cut time and run a little bit more and increase my load, so you're looking at doing 2 marathons in the space of 8 weeks, having previously done 1 marathon a year, so the load had increased and my body started to give me a few early warning signs that, hey, hold on, Amrit, like, I want to sort of back off a little bit, but I didn't. So moving on to the last major race of the year for me at the 2016 Chicago Marathon. So I won a ballot spot. So this will be my fourth major. I enjoyed Chicago. I never loved it. I just felt the out and backs were a little bit boring. I think I checked out of the race between like miles from halfway up to 20, and in the end it sort of became a battle of survival. I think I was probably a little bit tired from the year of training, bearing in mind this was my third marathon of the year. But I managed to come in at 3:22, so I've knocked off 7 minutes from the start of the year, and now I could start to see progress. I could start to see that Boston qualifying time. I always see it as like a ladder. You can take to get to the top of the ladder. You can't just jump to the top. You've got to take those necessary steps to get from step 1, step 2, step 3. At 3:22 that day, it was an eye-opener for me to really sort of think, hold on, I can actually sort of reach that time of sub 3:05 at the time. So I ran a 3:18 that day, just under 3:19 that day. So again, I cut off a few minutes, made like a 4-minute improvement from Chicago. The same training plan from NRC. So this was like a PDF document that I had that I stuck on the wall, and week in, week out, just tick off the sessions that I was doing. So yeah, that race was a good race. The faster that I was running now, with the experience that I had over the distance, this just did not get any easier. You're suffering in a different way. And I found as if that I was sort of learning that part of my running journey now that I was trying to decrease time from the clock, that I was having to sort of put more work in, and that was what was necessary. Following on from the 2017 London Marathon, I decided to get a coach. So you can start to see now that I'm thinking a little bit more of improvement and who can I learn from. I love someone looking over my training. I love someone giving me that sort of one-to-one feedback. Bear in mind, I never met the coach. 2017 was the first sort of period where I said to myself, I want to go for a sub 3, bearing in mind that I'd run 3:17. So I'm trying to cut 18 minutes to try and get that time for Boston. So that was always the driving force, I think, for a number of years, was Boston. So everyone who knows me would know that I'm a big advocate for running your Boston time. For me, it was always going to be running the time and standing on that start line in Hopkinton, knowing that you was there on merit. So that was a big driving force. The actual Berlin Marathon 2017 was probably one of my worst races. I think it was very much known as the sciatic nerve marathon. I had a bit of a breakdown in training in the August of that year, a few weeks earlier, and I just had an issue with my hamstring and my glute, and like the nerve was sort of pinching, and I don't know how I ran this race. The race was a wet race. It rained the whole way. I managed to run a PB by a couple of minutes. I think it was just through gritted teeth, just trying to get as much out of my body as possible. I started the race off with the intention of running sub 3, so I went about a mile into that race, where I then said to myself, it ain't happening today. I checked out in that race after mile 1, knowing that I would not get my A goal, B goal, C goal, whatever goal, gone. I just couldn't do it. It's the toughest race I've ever run, but I think that race made me the runner that I am today, because I knew what pain was. I learned sort of physical pain and my body physically breaking down. So I had to really address this issue, and it was just essentially through load. I think there was maybe a miscommunication between me and my coach and the sessions that we were doing, but it was just basically overloading my body, and I just couldn't handle it, and I just had to sort of limp my way to training and basically get myself through the race. At the time I didn't see it, but now I can see back in terms of the changes that I needed to make and the areas of sort of weakness that I had to address. At the end of 2017, I'd won a ballot spot for the 2017 New York Marathon, and this was one of those bucket list races where I just had to be there. Took 4 weeks off after Berlin, get that sort of weakness and that sort of strength addressed, and I was able to run the race. I had no issues running the race. That sort of pain and that phase where I give my body a bit of a break of 4 weeks, and then I started running again after. I had no pressure going to that race, and I think I fell in love with New York that day. I'd been there previously on holiday, but this was my first time running the New York City Marathon, and what a city. Incredible logistical masterpiece in terms of putting the race together. and I'd highly recommend it. Anyone out there who hasn't done that race yet, when you are safe to do so and safe to sort of go back to New York and run the New York Marathon, do it. If you can get into the race, go and run it, whatever you can do. I thoroughly loved it. The atmosphere was incredible, probably topped London for me, and that was my sort of my go-to and my number one race. And again, that ticked off 5 majors, so I was at number 5 now. I ran 3:29 that day, just coming under 3:30. So moving into 2018, so this year I'd say was the year that I started to take myself way more seriously. I had seen on Instagram a good friend actually run sub 3. His name was Justin. He was a strength and conditioning coach. He still is my strength and conditioning coach and also my running coach. And I've seen him run a sub 3 and I just loved the way he did it. And I remember saying to myself, I want to do what he's done. Bearing in mind that Berlin was my first and failed attempt at running sub 3. January of 2018, we met up and it was great. We sort of hit it off first session. We got into the gym, a weekly session together, and with the target of running the 2018 London Marathon. Everyone knows that race. It was the heatwave race. I'd been out injured in the February of that year with a soleus issue, for 2 to 3 weeks off. Wasn't able to do any sort of tune-up races, so I'd gone into the race slightly undercooked. I went off that day, made it to 10k, made it to 15k, 20k ish, with thought of trying to hit sub 3, but then I just had to back off. It was 24-25 degrees. It was just a shock to the system, as well as everyone else and the other thousands that were running at the time. So it changed from trying to run 3 that day to trying to survive the race. I remember just drinking and taking on so much water during that race, more than I would ever need to, just because I was just a bit scared. I was actually a bit scared on not wanting to end up in a tent. Backed off after just before halfway, and it was probably the smartest move I made for that particular race. No, in terms of was it the best decision in terms of getting me a personal best? No, but I didn't care. Sometimes you got to race with your head and really run really smart to the conditions on the day. Is it deeply worth it for me at that time in that particular race? No. I remember saying to myself, it's not worth it. And I came in at 3:19 that day. So now we're getting to the juicy part of this video. Hopefully you stayed part of this video for this long. If you have done so, well done. 2018 Berlin Marathon breakthrough sub 3, breakthrough in every shape and form. So that training block from the summer of 2018 was one of the best training blocks I've ever put together. It's the first one that me and Justin had worked together on from start to finish, and we incorporated a lot of speed work, a lot of alternating of weeks, A and B weeks. We did a lot more race specific long runs, so building on me as an endurance runner, me as a sort of doing this for such a long time, I already had a huge aerobic foundation, using parkrun as a benchmark, doing that every few weeks or so to see where you are speed wise, and also using the track. So I was actually going to the track for the first time, going into that race knowing I was going to break 3. It was all in the head. I think physically I put myself into such a good space. This time round I went into that race nutritionally, really cleaning up my diet, and I managed, not purposely, I think I lost 3 to 4 kilos just through eating better. Justin is a strength and conditioning coach, he's a running coach, he's also a nutritionist at the time, so if you start to see the pieces of the puzzle start to fall together in terms of getting things from different people, learning from different people, learning about recovery, my nutrition. So I started to eat a lot better, fuel my runs better. I was working with Science and Sport for a year, so I was using their recovery product. It sort of clicked for me during that race. The race I ran with the Pacers for 30k. I went off with the sub 3 Pacers. My plan was to stay with them up until 30k and then leave them, and that worked a treat for me in terms of the actual race execution, because I felt great. I just felt like, I remember standing on the start line and just looking at myself and my hands and my watch and be like, today's the day. But I still had to go and do it. I still had to go and physically run under 3 hours for 26.2 miles. So I was able to do that with the help of the Pacers. I put a lot of faith in them to sort of nail the splits, and we had a few splits going up and down during the race, but predominantly they were doing a fantastic job of actually sort of getting us to the time. I remember getting to 30k and looking at the watch and saying, now it's time to go. So like with 12k to go, just to be confident, know that I've put myself and set myself up into the race to deliver a dream time for me, and it still to this day gives me goosebumps to think about that experience in that race. And I remember leaving the paces, and I probably only gained in that last sort of 7 miles about 100, 200 meters, but mentally in my mind I knew that I had beaten them and I'd beaten the time. And I think a lot of that race was mental, and a lot of that training block was mental, and essentially it was a Boston qualifier. So I had one attempt to try and get into the 2019 race, and it was there on that Sunday. So for me, I'd done a lot of training, more than I sort of realised. I improved myself physically, covering the ground better. I was aware of my cadence, my form, my speed endurance, everything that sort of went into putting together a really, really accomplished training block and a solid race performance. And I remember coming through the Brandenburg Gate towards the end, and I was just in utter euphoria, and I just came in at 2:59.17, and I just couldn't believe I'd done it. It was just one of the most surreal experiences of my life. And applied for the Boston Marathon. I knew that I'd got in 10 days later. My planning and thinking was to move on to the 2019 Boston Marathon, but I still had New York. This time around I got a ballot spot, so this was my second race in a row in New York. I remember starting off on the Verrazano Bridge, and I looked at my watch, and looked at it, and it said like a 7:10 per mile, and I was like, I don't even feel like I'm trying. And I was like, okay, let's just go with it. Let's just see where we are. And in the end, I ran a negative split during that race, and I almost sub-3'd without even realising. I ran a 3:01, 3:31 for the first half, and then like a 3:29 or so for the second half, and it was close. In the end, I was chasing the time. Another great experience in New York. I couldn't fault the race at all. It was a beautiful sunny day, and my wife Sean was out there again with me, and it was just a fantastic experience to sort of run that race. And I just feel like that race does it differently compared for me to Chicago. So yeah, having run a 3:01 there, it kind of wrapped up the year for me. I was fit, I was healthy, and I'd just done another year of doing three majors, having broken 3 for the first time. Now we're moving to 2019 for the Boston Marathon with a slightly different training plan. We're looking at doing more hill work, looking at doing more sort of long runs over hills, just building that sort of endurance and that speed over hills into the legs. Bearing in mind, having looked at the course profile, is something that I had to do. The race was beyond anything that I could have prepared myself mentally and physically for, having done it for the first time. The first 15 miles of the course, if you know it well, goes predominantly downhill, and it's a rolling downhill, and then you hit 5 to 6 miles in the Newton area of hills. So it's 4 major hills, and everyone talks about Heartbreak Hill, but for me that's not the hill that did the damage. It was the one previously to that. Heartbreak Hill is almost like the sort of the ending of your little segment of running this little section, and you can sort of plan your way towards the end. But that race for me was my 6th star. I went into it knowing that it's going to be a celebration. It's a celebration on my running journey. Obtained these 6 majors, and it was a 7-year sort of quest in a way. Having sort of known about the majors to getting to that Boston time, and having sort of made it with 1 day to spare, it was almost like it was destiny. It was just destined to be there. I was destined to qualify. I was destined to sort of get into that race on that day and in this particular moment and this year. So I do believe in like things happening for a reason, and for me this was one of those sort of occasions in my life where I've said to myself, okay, I'm meant to be here. I remember wearing on my back like a little slip which from Abbott, which said that I was running for my 6th star, and it was such a nice feeling to wear that during the race, because people were coming up to me and giving me a pat on the back saying congrats on the 6th star. Like, added that little extra gloss for me being in Boston, because it's just a running centric mecca of the running world, and it was just a magical experience, having done the hilly part of the race, and then looking forward towards the downhill part of the race. Again, it's sort of, I was aiming towards just sort of getting to the end of the race. I went off way too fast. First 15 miles I clocked in like 126, 125.26 for the half. So I was on for like a low 250-ish. But then the wheels sort of just fell off towards in the middle part of the race where the hills were, and I just couldn't sustain it. I sort of felt as if the the feeling in my legs had gone, the draining of my legs, that they felt heavy and tired, and then obviously to throw into the fact that I just couldn't motor along the hills as much as I planned to and wanted to, and then in the end it was just about getting to the end, running strong, try and beat my PB if possible, and I did in the end. I managed to knock off like 20-30 seconds, but that wasn't the biggest thing for me. It was a bonus. I think it was a bonus to have done that, and I thoroughly loved that Boston experience. I will go back one day for sure when we were able to do so, and I'd highly recommend anyone sort of on the cusp of trying to BQ, trying to get that Boston qualifier, or just looking at the drawing board thinking, can I do it? Am I able to do it? Can I physically work harder? Do it. I'm an example, and hopefully this video is an example, and my marathon journey is an example, that from coming from 4 hours 42 down to 2:59:58 at the time, that you can do it. It is possible. If I can do it, anyone can do it. Just hard work, dedication, commitment and love for running, you're able to do so. Whether it takes you a year or so, or whether it takes you 10 years, it is worth the wait. So now moving into the 2019 Berlin Marathon, and I put together my best ever training block, building on what we had as a foundation from Boston. I believed I trained extremely hard for Boston, but I just never got the result out of the race, the nature of the course, and obviously trying to get the 6 star as well. I felt as if I took training for Boston and sort of translated that for Berlin. Knowing how well I've raced in Berlin, I knew I could put together a really good training block, and that's what sort of happened. We sort of honed in a bit more speed work. I joined Track East in East London, down at Mile End. I was going to their sessions every week on a Thursday. I was doing more double days, more speed work. I was doing more homework at home for strength and conditioning. I was just recovering better, sleeping better, eating better. Can't really say I had a bad run doing that training block. It was probably one of the most consistent periods of time for me running that everything just clicked, and we sort of dialed the weeks in terms of like an A and B week with the long runs. I did a lot of 20+ miler long runs. One week would have a very much marathon paced long run with blocks, 4 mile blocks, 10k blocks, 8 mile blocks, and then the following week would be time on your feet, go off road, run easy, and then the week after that we would sort of translate that again to a marathon place box. So we sort of worked in weight. I ran a lot more volume. I had a bit more solid work for my long runs in the midweek, and the race itself, I went off into that race knowing that I was in the best shape of my life. I'd PB'd in 5k, 10k, the half. Really gives me confidence, gave me confidence lining up that it was just 12 months previous I'd broken 3, and I think I was very much in low 250 shape, and I went off running at 6:30 pace knowing that I could comfortably hold that. And I remember about 6 miles into that race, I remember looking at my watch thinking, geez, I feel like I'm jogging, because like a lot of my speed work and a lot of my marathon place blocks was running a lot faster. We did a lot of our block based work a lot faster than what we was running, just so I could feel more comfortable running a slightly slower pace during the marathon. 10-15 seconds or so. I ran a really good race, very even in terms of timings. I ran like a 1:25 and a 1:26 for. My pace stayed very consistent throughout the race, and I felt great. The rain started falling at about 30k, and it didn't really hamper me, to be honest, but it was just a case of getting towards the end and just remaining very strong. The memory of that race will stay very vivid in terms of how to execute a race perfectly. I've said this many times on podcasts and people that I've met, that go into a race abroad, having to deal with the logistics of where you stay, where to go to eat, how to get to the start, how to navigate the start, where you warm up, where you go toilet. Because I've done it many times, I know what to do, I know where to go, so I just take that stress and that mental sort of energy that it requires out of my system, and then I'm able to just focus on the race. And I think that's what it was, that's what Berlin is for me. And yeah, the race was fantastic. It was a brilliant experience. Came in at 2:51. I don't think my predicted time on the app or the tracking deviated too far from like a 2:50 or a 2:51, so I stayed incredibly even throughout the race, and I can't wait to go back to Berlin. Capping off the year was the New York Marathon. I actually got into this race through a qualifying time of a half, which was the first time I was able to do so. I had no goals for the race. I'd had a great period in Berlin. I took a little bit of time off after Berlin and then dialed back into training for about 6 or so weeks. Certain sessions, certain workouts and certain runs give me confidence to know that I can able to do what I'm hoping to do. It was a beautiful day in New York that day. I ran really well, and then sort of into the race, to the sort of the latter part of the race, I just got so tired, so knackered, legs were feeling it. I actually ran that race with a cramped foot from the very start of that race. Not a lot of people know this, but my right foot, something was up, completely cold during the warm-up. I took my shoe off, took my sock off, tried to rub my feet together, get heat onto the foot. I just couldn't seem to warm it up. Started the race and I just remember feeling a little bit uncomfortable with the foot. That it was like a deep sort of throbbing pain into the foot. I kind of just ignored it as much as I could because I didn't want to stop during the race. I was fatiguing, getting tired. It just got to the stage when I was turning, it was just excruciating pain, and I honestly thought I'd broken my foot. And I remember finishing, I just keeled over and I couldn't put any weight on the foot whatsoever. I was in the medical tent for half an hour. I took my shoe off, took my sock off, which wasn't incredibly difficult to do. I couldn't actually physically touch the foot because it was in so much pain. I took a painkiller. Shana was waiting for me at the finish line. I didn't have my phone on me, so she had no idea where I was, and she just hobbled my way out of the tent. Having run 2:58 that day, I was happy to sub 3. It was another one in a row where I'd managed to do it. So that was running New York City Marathon with a cramped foot as well as a sub 3. Made it to 2020. This year has thrown us a situation which we've just never been in before. Races got cancelled. We're in the midst of a pandemic and everything's gone virtual. Marathon race this year was the virtual London Marathon. So for me, this race wasn't about sort of PBing. I didn't have the perfect training block. I did like 15 weeks of returning from running, and I mean walk running and then running again. So the very base starting period for me. So it was my first serious injury in 13 years of running, and the virtual for me was the chance to run a marathon distance and try and sub 3. My goal was to try and sub 3 and was able to do that with a lot of help from my family, and it was unique in a way to run a lap to route of Victoria Park. And if you see from my previous video, which I'll link to up there, you'll be able to see how I ran that race as I took the camera along. I've almost got the collection of sub 3s in all 6 majors. I've only got to do Tokyo and Chicago to do the complete set, so that might be something I do in the future. It's not something I'm gonna plan my race calendar around. It's just, if it happens, it happens. If it doesn't, it doesn't. So guys, thank you for watching. Thank you for staying with it for such a long time. It's not easy to sort of fit this into like a 5-10 minute video, but I want you to sort of take you on that sort of journey and that sort of story of where I started to where I am now. So if you've got any comments that you want to share with me, please do so. I'll definitely get back to you. But thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.